But let's dive in. Let's dive into this month's excitingness, and start off with this is I suppose a topic as opposed to a news story, which is a topic which is topical certainly for what we're doing here, and that is the question of engagement. And this, in particular, there's a news story or it's like a commentary that was started on The Guardian, which essentially went along the lines of "I'm a serious academic, not a professional Instagrammer," and this question of whether or not actually, I suppose, social media undermines good archaeological and I suppose academic work in particular, and also whether or not actually an academic should be expected to be engaging with this stuff at all. So there's an engagement issue. There's like a dividing your time issue, but I guess also as well, actually, there's another element here which I think is very pertinent, and that is the fact that, well, where else are people going to get their good information from?
Yeah, I think it's also particularly pertinent at the moment because we've just seen the publication of a very interesting paper by Suzie from University of Helsinki, used to be at Glasgow, and she has written about the experience of an academic working for television, and actually not particularly happy experience of working for television.
No.
We'll put the link up to Susie's paper. I wouldn't dream of speaking on her behalf. The paper says it all, really. But it makes some very interesting and pertinent points about the different cultures, and it's something I'm interested in myself. And I mean, in a sense, you and I are the wrong people to talk about this subject now. And again, we'll invite our audience to respond, because you and I, obviously, just by the virtue of what we do, you running Archaeo-Scope, me editing Pipeline, engagement is front and centre of how we do our archaeology, our contribution to the world of archaeology.
Well, it's an unfortunate side effect, No, I'm joking. No, you're right. Sorry, you're right. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. In that sense, we do put ourselves out there, and we also expect a certain amount of to and fro. Yeah. But sorry. So as you were saying there, so.
No, it was simply that I think the issue of engagement, and to pick up and I don't want to overdo a theme that we looked at last time, but in the world that we live in of mistrust of experts and fake news and so on, I think the engagement between people who study and research professionally, whatever the subject, and the wider, again, it's not just one audience, it's audiences. It's how we go out, what we put in front of our audiences, how we allow them to respond to us, what we take cognizance of, what we turn around and say, actually, you're wrong, and this is what we think. There's a lot of very loaded and emotive questions around this issue, and I think we should be show a certain humility, shall we say, and say, we're not going to solve it in a 15-minute conversation. This is something that we are all going to have to address together going forward.
Yes, this is true, but it's also one of those things where, in that sense, I mean, going back, I guess, to the title of the particular article, from the perspective of an academic, this can feel like an unfortunate tag on. And what I'll do is I'll put a link, if I recall. I will remember. I'll put a link below to a video I did a little while ago about the risks of engaging with public archaeology, which was actually used in a lecture the other day, which was live tweeted in my way. People frequently.
Is that high impact citation, though?
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, and then it's weird because people often say, "Oh yes, we use your stuff in lectures all the time." But I only ever hear it after the fact. I've never actually been tweeted expected to respond at the moment. It was fun though. But the point is is that increasingly, I think yes, it's a question being asked from that perspective, but more than that, it's something which is being tackled more and more as a question to be answered within the university system as well. So, for example, in that instance, some students at Chester University were being asked to debate public engagement. I, for example, am in the course of delivering a series of lectures at Newcastle University to a couple of different classes on public engagement, and yeah, some of it is the technical stuff, how you go about maybe putting a video together, but also actually, frankly, just getting it into people's heads that not only is there a funding element, it's good to be able to talk about your work for funding purposes, but also these days it is about defending truth and veracity. And we've already touched on that last month, I suppose, in terms of post-truth. But there is an element here which I think is pertinent, and that is that, coming back to this sort of idea of social media and also other forms of media, the fact that actually the media will engage with people on those topics if you don't. If I was talking to the person who wrote that headline or that comment, that's probably the first thing I would say is that you're leaving a void there, and also a void that people want to be filled. We're in a post-time team world. I think you were saying to me the other day we should sort of talk about archaeological media as PTT, like post-time team, and so people actually, they want, not only do they demand it, but also that they're interested. They're genuinely interested, and if you don't engage with people, if it doesn't have to be Instagram, it can be a blog. I was interviewing someone this morning who's got an excellent blog. If you don't do that, someone else will, and they'll probably do a shoddy job of it.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, one of the points that's about engagement that Suzie makes in her paper is that by engaging with audiences, with the media, using the media in its broadest sense in this case, but particularly looking at the broadcast media, it won't stop bad archaeology in the media. It won't stop inaccurate perceptions of archaeology in the media. On the other hand, I would say that if we don't engage, it pretty well assures the fact we're going to get bad archaeology in the media, inaccurate perceptions of archaeology in the media, misuse actually of history and archaeology in the media. And picking up your point about funding, again, I think that certainly in most Western European models, even North American models, and also in Australia, somehow or other, even if it's indirectly through somebody buying a house from a developer, the developers had to do some developer-funded archaeology to get their planning permission, the public are paying for the archaeology that we report on, that we do, that we discuss. And I think that there is an absolute responsibility to make the work available to the paying public.
So yeah, well, yes, in that sense, there's an economic ownership, and also there are archaeologists, and indeed I think I'd count myself amongst them, who would also point to the fact that there is a humanitarian ownership, and indeed there's also a moral obligation, I would say, as well.
I agree with you completely. That there, like all of the questions that we do, we're discussing in the course of these chats, and our colleagues out there in the community will know from their own experience. There are so many layers on these things, and that's one of the things actually that makes the tying the issues down and tying the responsibilities down and the ethical responsibilities down so difficult. Is that there are so many layers, there are so many different possible points of view, not all of which are contradictory. You can have a whole series of views side by side about a particular issue, and so we're going to you inevitably end up with what could appear like a confused or an unsatisfactory situation, when in fact all you're doing is acknowledging the complexities of life, really. Our discipline's not alone in that. No,
yeah, and I guess in that sense, because we'll touch the next thing we're going to talk about. Actually, is going to be the public image of archaeology. So I won't go too far down that rabbit hole yet, but in that sense, there is a tendency, I think, for some people when they get to a certain point in their career, especially as archaeologists, and as archaeologists who haven't dedicated themselves maybe to studying, Cambodia or something like that, they want to be able to kind of retreat. Especially I've known a couple of very venerable folk who they just want to just get on with their study, and they don't want to have to talk about it to people. Frankly, they almost resent having to talk to students about their work. Got a lecture again. But I think there's also, even with people who have a very strong distaste for the notion, there is even a way of getting this through to them, and making this argument to them in the shape of essentially keeping it alive. I mean, I'm thinking about people who have, very, for example, niche interests, maybe a particular type of pottery or something like that. I'm not referring to the interests of the people I'm thinking about deliberately, just in case. But if they do have a very niche interest, then they also need to have their own, acolytes, as it were, to follow them. And as with all of this, from train spotting to stamp collecting to archaeology to to people who, for example, like brutalist architecture, as we'll talk about in a bit.
Yes, we know what's coming.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no accounting for taste, but also, more to the point, there's a I put this another way. I went through a large period of my life avoiding tomatoes. I hated tomatoes, and I even made it through university able to avoid tomatoes as a poor student. But then it got to a point when I was living and working for myself in York, and one day I'd bought a sandwich, treated myself to a sandwich, and in the sandwich was tomatoes. I was like, and just tried to pick them out. But it occurred to me that actually, first of all, I couldn't afford just to throw the tomatoes away. But secondly, there is a collective wisdom that says tomatoes in this combination of salad actually taste quite nice, and therefore I should try it. So I tried it, and okay, it's still not my favourite thing in the world, but the point is it works. And so even though people might not want to engage with the tomato that is outreach and social media and this kind of thing, you can nonetheless share with them the reason why you like your tomato, the reason why what makes your actual particular tastes and passions interesting, and bring them along with your stamp collecting or whatever, because that's, people don't go down into these little sort of esoteric studying of certain types of pottery without having a passion, and passion comes from interesting things, and so share the interest. I think that there's something there, isn't there? Surely.
I think so, and I think one of the other things as well. You were talking about a niche interest. I think one of the joys and wonders of the internet age that we're living in, the social media age that we're living in, is that we can share those passions relatively cheaply, relatively easily, worldwide. And one person's passion might be BB2 pottery from the 1st century or whatever, and that's a very niche thing, and you might write a paper about it, or even an academic report about it, and it'll go into several university libraries who still forward hard copies, and it might get cited 1 or 2 times a year, maybe. But you might also find that if you put that out on the net, that you've suddenly got 10, 20, 30 people who are really interested in BB2 pottery of the 1st century, and you immediately have a conversation going. You immediately have something in common. It's like, it's the same whether you follow a football club or a particular artist or a TV series. It is very much easier to be, albeit at a distance and albeit through pixels and electrons, but it's very much easier to be sociable in these areas than it used to be. And so the ivory, the walls of the ivory tower are becoming transparent.
Well, and in that sense, I think the irony is, the assumption is that the public will come pouring into your office and make a mess, but actually, I think you'll probably find that, as you say, you're going to find that probably that select 10 or 20 people who might have something interesting to say, they're going to come to you, they're going to find you, precisely because you're making yourself available. So it can also be a really stimulating way of working, certainly.
I mean, any of us who've worked in this area and have worked and have used social media at some point has an experience of abuse, insult, trolling. It's happened to me a couple of times. But that was it. It was sort of expected because of the stories that have been published, written, and in a sense, that they were written, that they were authored pieces, and people knew who was behind them, and responded in their lights appropriately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But actually, in a sense, even if you're being trolled, unpleasant though it can be, it's also something of a success because it means you've certainly made an impression on somebody, and it's in a sense it's no different than the kind of backbiting and backstabbing that you read about in memoirs of the common room in the 1930s.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I mean, I'll probably sort of bring us to a close on this point, but I mean, I would encourage people to check out that other video we did because I cover some of this stuff in there. But there is this element as well of, frankly, if your ideas aren't robust enough to stand up to a bit of a ribbing from people who are lay people, then maybe you should revisit your ideas. That's something else as well. But I don't want to go too further with this. But I think that's an interesting point.
Can I make one last point to finish, and it ties in with what you were saying earlier about the sort of ethical duty that is, in a lot of archaeological codes of practice. There's an ethical duty to publish, and the moment you publish, you're part of a two-way discussion, and people might disagree with you. That's part of the territory. It's actually part of the fun of it as well, I think. I can't think of a single case where ultimately a publication that I've been involved with hasn't been very positive through the involvement of people who have no idea who I am, my background. They're responding to the page, they're responding to the website or whatever, and we end up in a conversation. We Brits are supposed to be really bad at striking up conversations with strangers on the bus, and unless or on the train or whatever. You hide behind your paper.
You're in the wrong part of Britain, Andy. It's the south, I tell you. The northeast. They're so friendly here. Anyway, before we get into north-south divide politics, speaking of which, actually, that's directly linked with what I'm celebrating at the moment, the Viking Festival and the old Danelaw. York has its Viking Festival this week. That's what. Yes, indeed. The reason for that.